As 2025 comes to a close, the Israel-Gaza conflict remains one of the year's most impactful stories. From brief ceasefires to renewed fighting and a deepening humanitarian crisis, the region saw major turning points that are still affecting millions. We're looking this morning back at the key moments that shaped this conflict and what they mean as we head into 2026. Military expert and professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University, Christian Ruprecht, is joining us to do that. Good morning. Good morning, Anne-Marie. Christian, when you look back at 2025, what stands out to you as the single most defining moment in the conflict this year?
The re-election of Donald Trump and the manifestation that ultimately nothing much happens in the world when it comes to serious conflicts without the United States and the United States' ability to try to maneuver and find a common ground between its interests and the interests of the conflicting parties.
You know, your answer surprises me because I would have said it was the hostage release and the prisoner exchange. In 2025, we watched that, and although the body of one hostage still remains in the Gaza Strip, there are a lot of families who reunited, and we saw those incredible pictures. Others were finally able to put the remains of their loved ones to rest. There was some closure for the families. How did those developments shape diplomacy and public pressure on both sides?
Yeah, what you're observing, of course, here is an effect. We needed to put together conditions in place that allowed for those effects to transpire, that allowed for sufficient, at least communication between the two sides in the conflict to have the prisoner exchange, for sufficient communication between the two sides to rebuild any sort of trust on which they could actually build some sort of a ceasefire, because ultimately a ceasefire means at least some limited amount of trust that the other side is also going to stick to their end of the bargain. And then, of course, the outcome of trying to relieve some of the humanitarian suffering, which, of course, manifests both in death on both sides, as well as the humanitarian suffering that the Palestinian population has been exposed to as a result of the actions of Hamas.
Christian, on that point of ceasefires, we saw multiple, some holding briefly, others collapse very quickly. Can you call what we're in right now? Technically, they are in a ceasefire, but the fighting is still happening.
Yeah, and it's a very tenuous ceasefire because, of course, I would say the ceasefire is really on life support. It says a lot about the power of the parties involved. That ceasefire was, of course, backed by Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, all of which have been critical to a greater or lesser degree of Israel throughout the conflict and have a vested interest in stability in the region. And so I think it's not just the United States, it's the other powers, and the fact that that ceasefire was also underwritten by the UN Security Council that is providing some sustainability, but there is no clear path forward for the infamous second phase of this ceasefire, and so simply keeping it in place is, I think, a daily struggle.
Yes, and you're good to remind us that this is a multi-step process. We're only in step one. Humanitarian groups, some of which we've had on this show, have been sounding the alarm throughout the year as the fighting and the bombardments created these uninhabitable daily conditions. UN agencies say famine has been pushed back into the Gaza Strip. They warn the situation is very fragile there. How would you describe what it is like? I mean, we're showing pictures on the ground right now, but how would you describe to where it sits in December as to where we started in January of 2025?
Well, so viewers need to imagine the Gaza Strip is a very small piece of land, 10 kilometers wide, 41 kilometers long, so about the size of the city of Kingston, where I reside, and over 2 million people in this tiny strip of land. And in the current situation, Israel controls about half of it, and the other half is controlled by Hamas, and almost all the population is in the half that is controlled by Hamas. So you can imagine that even sort of under optimal circumstances, that would be an extremely challenging environment for people to live in. Now, of course, under conditions where much of the infrastructure has been destroyed, we're going into winter, and of course, there continues to be significant challenges in terms of providing just basic aid into the Gaza Strip. So certainly terrible suffering, along with many other places in the world that are experiencing terrible humanitarian suffering.
It is just rubble. There's no rebuilding. It is just existing meagerly. As we head into 2026, what are some of the key things that the world should be watching for in this conflict?
Well, it reminds us that we need to provide security and stability in order for there to be any hope that we can actually rebuild. It also reminds us that we need to have a future for Palestinians. Why do Palestinians and people in the Gaza Strip support Hamas? Because the Oslo Accords and subsequently the Palestinian Authority have not brought a sustainable, prosperous, secure, and democratic future. And so the real challenge here is how do we make sure that we have a sustainable future for the people of Gaza that ultimately gives them hope? And in the immediate, that means some sort of a monitoring observer force, some ability to disarm Hamas, some ability to provide some stability within Gaza and some stability for plurality of different political views within Gaza, all of which Hamas is ultimately opposed to. And some might say perhaps the end outcome of a Palestinian state. But ironically, on that end goal, there's the agreement that we currently have is the most ambiguous. So it's going to be a very long pathway. And this, of course, is the longest running and arguably one of the most violent conflicts of the last century. And so it suggests that we're likely going to see, I think this is going to be a very difficult path forward.
Kristen, thank you for coming on today, and thank you for all of your insight and expertise that you've shared with our viewers here on Your Morning throughout 2025. We'll talk to you more in 2026. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Happy New Year.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.